We spend so much of our lives just in transit. You think about it.
Mhm.
You book a ticket, you board a plane, you find your seat on a train,
Mhm.
and you're relying completely on this implicit promise that the journey will end, that you'll arrive.
Right. It's a fundamental certainty. It's the bedrock of how we move around the world.
But what happens when that certainty just vanishes?
That's the question, isn't it? What happens when that mechanical shell, that vessel, a freighter, a jet, a 100-ton locomotive, simply exits reality, when it takes its cargo, human or otherwise, into these shadows of the track?
That's where you find this real deep-seated terror.
Exactly.
And that's our deep dive today. We're getting into the anatomy of vanishing. Our mission is to really unpack this stack of sources we have. And it includes everything from, the meticulously documented sober reality of catastrophic failure reports.
Like the NTSB documents on the Emperor derailment or the analysis of Emirates Flight 521.
Right. And we're putting those right alongside the enduring dark myths of ships and trains that just cease to be.
Well, and we're not just recounting stories here. We're
Yeah.
trying to synthesize knowledge from both of those extremes. We're looking for the vital engineering lessons hidden in the rational, predictable failures.
But we're also exploring the psychological truths, the uncanny narratives that are embedded in these tales of the impossible. Why do we cling to these stories of disappearance?
The dichotomy was just fascinating. I mean, that's really where we're starting.
Yeah, how does the exhaustive detail of, say, an official air crash investigation, where every second, every lever pull, every micro failure is mapped out over hundreds of pages, how does that compare to the unsettling, unresolved fate of a phantom train?
A train that's only glimpsed in the peripherals of history, that defies all known laws of physics.
It's a stark contrast.
It really is. It shows us the limits of our own knowledge and control. We can break down the decades-long chain of negligence that causes a railroad bridge to fail in a flood. We can calculate exactly who is responsible and when.
But you can't offer any rational explanation for a modern express train that arrives on time with 300 passengers worth of luggage, half-full coffee cups, and absolutely no one on board.
That's the dark edge of what we can prove. That's what we're exploring.
Okay, so let's start this journey with the rails. For over a century, the train has been this symbol of industrial power, of reliability.
Sure.
And one of our sources uses this brilliant line to describe the paradox. It says the train is a mechanical shell, a vessel of transit that occasionally and inexplicably loses its cargo to the shadows of the track.
That's a great line.
And that idea of transit failing on this grand, impossible scale, it's captured nowhere better than in the dark legend of the Zanetti train.
Ah, the Zanetti train, 1911. This story is so resonant because it just completely undermines the reliability of the modern rail network.
So lay out the core story for us.
Okay, so the story originates in Italy. It involves a standard scheduled Rome to Milan express train. The date is July 14th, 1911. You've got 106 people on board.
A routine trip.
Totally routine. The train approaches and enters a very long, but also very routine tunnel. It was seen entering, but it never, ever emerged from the other end.
Just gone.
Gone. The search was immediate, but they found nothing. No derailment, no collapsed tunnel, no wreckage, no debris.
And the only tangible evidence we have, the only account, comes from two passengers who somehow survived. Or maybe escaped is the better word.
Yes. They were found later, miles away, and they were terrified.
And their account is, it's the key to the whole mystery, isn't it?
It is. They claimed they jumped out of the train just before the tunnel because a dense, scary, yellowish-white fog suddenly engulfed the entire carriage.
A fog inside the train car.
Right. They described it as this terrifying, claustrophobic atmosphere, and they jumped to avoid it, landing just outside the tunnel entrance, and then they watched the train just vanish into the stone.
So that fog seems to be this literal chilling veil between one reality and the next.
Exactly. And this is where the story stops being a simple railway accident and just leaps into the realm of a true temporal anomaly. And that's what gives it its lasting power.
Because the first story of its reappearance surfaces, 15 years later? And not in Europe.
Not even close. Across the ocean. The story spread that 104 Italians, the exact number missing, minus the 2 who jumped, arrived, seemingly out of thin air, in Mexico City.
And our sources mention documents that reference a specific psychiatrist there, right? A Dr. Jose Saxino.
That's right. He allegedly interned these 104 very confused Italians.
And here's the really unnerving detail. They claim they arrived by train from Rome.
Yes. But Dr. Saxeno's timeline, according to some of these documents, was in the 1840s.
So the train didn't just skip 15 years.
It skipped 7 decades and traveled across the entire globe, materializing not just out of sight, but completely out of time. So the Zanetti train, according to the legend that followed, was never found, and this leads to the belief that it's now a mechanical specter, wandering alone in time and space, just depositing its human cargo at random points in history.
The train itself becomes this engine of temporal displacement, a steel-plated ghost.
Like much.
But because this is a deep dive, we have to look at the critical thinking nugget here, which is vital. This myth, as persistent as it is, has been investigated.
Oh, absolutely, by skeptics, by researchers, and they found that the supporting evidence for this whole reappearance story is, well, it's utterly fabricated. But the story still endures.
So the debunking is as systematic as a failure report.
Completely. Investigators found no verifiable trace of a railway company named Zanetti. There was no documentation proving a psychiatrist named Jose Saxeno ever operated in Mexico City in the 1840s, let alone interned 100 Italian immigrants.
And the other names, Leszczady, Captain Borghese.
All unverifiable. Same with the sources they cited, like a Ukrainian newspaper called The Glory of Sebastopol. They just don't check out in the context they were cited.
So the core fact remains. 104 people disappeared in a tunnel. The rest is just pure, chilling fabrication designed to fill that void.
And yet, our sources confirm the myth is so deeply ingrained that in many countries, people still report seeing the Zanetti train. It'll appear for a few seconds, then disappear again.
It suggests that even if the details are false, the narrative itself, the idea of an unexplained vanishing, has this permanent psychological hold.
And the train wasn't the only vessel apparently capable of this kind of temporal mischief. We can move from the phantom rails to the phantom skies. The stories of ghost planes and time warps often share the exact same narrative template.
We have two eerily similar stories here, almost carbon copies of each other. Pan Am Flight 914 and Santiago Airlines Flight 513.
Let's start with Pan Am.
Okay, Pan Am 914 was a Douglas DC-4. It had 61 people on board. It vanished over the Atlantic in 1955 on a routine 3-hour flight from New York to Florida.
And just like the Zanetti train, no debris, no distress signal, no trace, just gone.
Then the impossible reappearance. 37 years later, on September 9th, 1992, this old propeller plane suddenly appears at Caracas Airport in Venezuela.
1,240 miles off course.
The pilot, completely confused, radios the tower. And when he's told the current date, 1992, he reportedly freaked out, waved his hands in horror, and just took off again.
And immediately vanished into the sky, never to return.
And the second story, Santiago Airlines Flight 513, follows that template almost exactly.
Right. It vanishes over the Atlantic in 1954, reappears 35 years later in 1989, and it lands perfectly in Brazil.
But the horror in this version is what they found inside.
This is the darker twist. The plane lands, but the crew and all 88 passengers inside were skeletons. They were long-deceased remains, just sitting in their seats.
What's really illuminating for our deep dive is that the sources reveal a detective and investigator named Anderson who analyzed both of these ghost plane cases.
And he realized they were nearly identical. The structure, the timeline, the details. They only differed slightly in dates and names, and he found they were both published in the same sensationalist newspaper.
That's the key insight. They were fabricated stories, based on the exact same template of deep-sea and aerial mystery, yet they spread globally as two separate, unique paranormal events.
Which raises an important question, right? Why do we, as an audience, so readily accept the idea of temporal displacement when we're talking about vessels lost over the Bermuda Triangle or the vast Atlantic?
I think it's a necessary psychological comfort.
How so?
Well, it satisfies the human need for a supernatural, limitless answer when the logical, depressing answer that the plane crashed, sank without a trace, and all the evidence was just pulverized or hidden by the ocean is just too final. Too mundane.
So we prefer the terror of the unexplained to the terror of a solved accident.
I think so. But to challenge that comfort, we have the account of Bruce Gernon in 1970. This one's presented as a real-life, documented anomaly that defies immediate explanation, even if it's not a commercial jet vanishing.
Right. He was flying his own plane near the Florida coast when a giant, strange cloud formed and just trapped his plane.
His instruments failed, lights were flashing. He felt this profound physical disorientation. And when he emerged, he had covered 250 miles in only 47 minutes.
which is about half the normal flight time of 1.5 hours. And he used far less fuel than was mathematically possible.
So it was a measurable, real temporal discrepancy that happened entirely within his personal experience.
And there is a logical explanation that the source provided. It's grounded in solar physics. There was strong solar wind and massive sunspots detected that day, which could have caused severe electronic and magnetic malfunction in his small aircraft.
But look at the implication there. The rational explanation. A catastrophic solar storm creating a distortion field that physically accelerated his aircraft is almost as terrifying as the irrational one, that he flew through a time tunnel.
Either way, for that short period, the laws of physics bent around his small plane.
From the air to the water, let's talk about the chilling, real-life phenomena of ghost ships, vessels that refuse to die or reveal their final secret.
The SS Beishamo is a spectacular case, just a case of endurance and defiance against sinking. Built in 1914, it was a real merchant vessel that got stuck in heavy ice off the coast of Alaska in 1931.
And the crew abandoned it. They were convinced it would be crushed by the ice and sink.
But instead, it survived that brutal winter. It broke free of the ice and just continued to drift listlessly across the Arctic Ocean.
And it was spotted periodically for 38 years.
Yeah.
A massive, uncrewed steel specter, with the last verified sighting in 1969.
People tried repeatedly to board it, to salvage it, but bad weather or drifting ice always thwarted their efforts. It was like the ship itself refused to be captured.
38 years of sailing alone. That makes it, demonstrably, the longest sailing ghost ship in modern history.
And the mystery isn't so much where the crew went, we know that. It's more about how the vessel itself refused to succumb to the Arctic environment. Efforts to find its wreck since 2006 have been entirely unsuccessful.
It remains lost. Maybe it's still drifting.
And then, of course, there is the quintessential maritime mystery, the Mary Celeste.
Found sailing strangely between the Azores in 1872. It was discovered by another ship, the Dei Gracia, and it was listing heavily, sails partially set, but it was fully provisioned.
6 months of food and water, all personal belongings accounted for.
And completely abandoned. Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, his 2-year-old daughter, and 7 crew members were all gone.
The terrifying thing about the Mary Celeste is the domesticity of the disappearance. The ship was in decent condition, there was a half-eaten meal in the galley, but every single person had simply ceased to exist on board.
The leading hypothesis suggests that the missing lifeboats meant they planned an evacuation.
Right. A faulty chronometer, combined with severe weather and the heavy listing of the ship due to, poor cargo distribution, may have led Captain Briggs to believe the ship was mortally damaged and about to sink.
So the real horror of the Mary Celeste, and why it's still such a powerful mystery, is that this decision to abandon ship, made under duress and fear, proved fatal.
They fled the vessel, only for the vessel to mock them by sailing on alone, perfectly provisioned, potentially watching its former occupants perish in the lifeboats that were never, ever recovered.
We've talked about these vessels vanishing across oceans and decades, this grand, impossible vanishing act. Now let's transition from that macro mystery to the micro mystery.
The localized personal experiences that are unsettling, uncanny, and sometimes even physically induced. It proves that terror often lives in the small, inexplicable moments.
This section looks at the shadows of the track,
Yeah.
starting with phantom trains that carry no one. And we're moving from historical legend to a modern, verifiable anomaly. Our sources have a modern, deeply unsettling case from Eastern Europe.
This story sounds like a direct sequel to the Zanetti train, but with a modern twist. A regional express train arrived exactly on schedule at its final station in Eastern Europe. The engine was running, lights were on, emergency brakes perfectly engaged.
But when officials boarded the coaches,
Every single seat was empty.
and the details in the source are what elevate this to like a true horror setup.
Absolutely. Luggage was sitting neatly on the racks. Personal items, newspapers, water bottles, and those half-full coffee cups were undisturbed on the trays.
And there were over 300 passengers listed on the manifest. All vanished.
The investigation found no sign of struggle, no alarms triggered, and crucially, CCTV confirmed the doors never opened at the last stop or at any of the previous stops for long enough to allow for a massive, silent evacuation.
So the case remains archived as an unresolved anomaly. A modern ghost train carrying nothing but air and the implication of a sudden, instant vanishing.
And this level of pure mystery stands in stark contrast to the real phantom trains running in England, particularly in small towns like Snith.
Right, these are also ghost trains, but their ghostly nature is rooted not in, some physics failure, but in pure administrative absurdity.
It's the ultimate bureaucratic black comedy. These trains run completely empty through abandoned redundant railways, not because of a time slip, but because the bureaucratic cost to officially cancel a route.
The consultations, the public inquiries, all the taxpayer procedures.
All of that outweighs the operating costs of just letting an empty train run on the track.
So these trains, which are ghostly only because of accounting, have ironically created a tourist attraction. Enthusiasts seek them out as these absurd symbols of institutional inertia.
A ghost train generated by paperwork, not the paranormal.
Okay, so now let's pivot and look at how rigorous scientific investigation can dismantle the supernatural, turning ghost lights and haunted houses into solvable problems, which is surprisingly satisfying.
The St. Louis light in Saskatchewan, Canada is a classic example. For decades, locals reported a mysterious, flickering white or red light near abandoned train tracks. The urban legend claimed it was the ghost of a conductor looking for his head with a lantern.
And the solution came from two high school students in 2001 for their science fair project. They approached it like a true deep dive.
Meticulous methodology. They used a detailed map, a compass, and a, for the time, relatively rare GPS unit to triangulate and track the light's source.
And they proved conclusively the light was just distant car headlights appearing on a short hilltop highway stretch miles away.
Right. The light was distorted and appeared unnaturally large because of atmospheric diffraction. It was bending the light as it passed through layers of air and trees, a physical effect that generated decades of ghost stories.
A decade later, a similar legend, the Anson light in Texas, was debunked by students using iPhones and Google Maps.
Yeah, the legend there was it was a mother with a lantern searching for her son lost in a snowstorm.
The students just followed the mapping software down a remote dirt road and tracked the source back to the completely rational light pattern of cars on a distant curvy highway.
In both cases, the light was real, the experience was real, but the explanation was just geometry and physics.
But that uncanny feeling, the true feeling of terror or dread, can also be generated by things we can't see or smell. It can turn our own minds against us.
The Coventry University cellar case is a perfect illustration of this kind of physiological haunting. A lecturer, who was also a part-time ghost hunter, investigated a 14th century cellar where multiple visitors reported seeing a blurred ghost of a woman.
And experiencing intense terror, nausea, physical chills.
But the cause was entirely physiological, not spectral. The lecturer found high, specific levels of sound frequency in the cellar, infrasound, or low-frequency vibration. It's often called the fear frequency.
And this infrasound, which is below the range of human hearing, physically affects the human body. It causes anxiety, chills, and it can even vibrate your eyeball, which induces optical illusions.
So it's effectively conjuring a ghost through pure acoustics. The terror was real, but it was self-generated by the environment.
And there's another powerful physiological explanation in the story of the haunted house that wasn't. A family in an old house from 1921 reported hearing phantom footsteps, furniture dragging, distinct sighing sounds.
And the haunting became more personal, more terrifying, as the sounds seemed to follow them down the halls.
This frightening experience was later traced to a faulty furnace emitting carbon monoxide.
The colorless, odorless gas was causing chronic headaches, dizziness, and severe lasting hallucinations. The family was experiencing these terrifying internal realities projected onto their external world.
And the real horror, the subtle, invisible poisoning, was far more dangerous than any ghost.
This analysis of internal versus external terror leads us to the most unsettling part of this section, truly uncanny personal moments, the times when reality feels structured like a thriller, and the line between normal life and psychological horror just blurs completely.
And it's often centered on the simple failure of security.
That sense of vulnerability is so profound. Imagine the chilling scenario of the third-floor walk-up. A resident heard someone messing with their knob lock late at night. They dismissed it, thought it was a dream or a sound from downstairs.
But in the morning, the simple keyable knob lock was found 3/4 of the way to the open position.
And it was secured only by the internal, non-keyable deadbolt.
The horror there isn't just that someone tried to break in. It's the realization of how close they came, combined with the unnerving detail that the knob didn't look forced.
That specific vulnerability on a third floor where you feel inherently safe makes the failure of that simple mechanism incredibly unsettling.
And that vulnerability is magnified in the story of the dark hotel room whisper. You're drifting off to sleep in a strange place, you're already a bit disoriented.
And you hear a soft, disembodied whisper in the dark room aimed right at you. I think they're asleep now.
The simplicity of it, the implication of being watched, and the immediate invasion of your privacy creates a perfect, terrifying scene.
We also have the environmental uncanny, which relies on the complete absence of normal sensory input.
Right. A group of friends hiking deep in a marshland at night noticed the forest was just utterly silent. No frogs, no bugs, none of the normal sonic landscape.
And this was quickly followed by a heavy, foul smell, described as a mix of old, dirty clothes and human decay. They immediately felt a predator was near. That unnatural quiet is a classic sign.
Then, deep inside the dark path, they start hearing a specific, pronounced mechanical click, like a heavy Snapple bottle cap being popped, but coming from different, seemingly encircling directions.
The source described the feeling that the entire forest simply stood up and was watching them.
The relief, when it came, must have been immense. They ran into a figure who removed his helmet and identified himself as a Marine Corps officer.
He explained they had unknowingly stumbled into a complex military war game. The silence was extreme stealth, the smell was combat gear and unwashed soldiers, and the clicks were the sounds of weapons movements and communication systems.
The rational explanation was intense, but entirely physical.
And the lack of movement can be just as terrifying as motion. Another account describes driving through a deserted, eerie trailer park at night and discovering hundreds of silent, unmoving deer.
Everywhere. On the roads, on top of cars, standing silently on top of campers.
And the source emphasized that not a single one moved. No ear twitch, no tail flick, no ground scratch, just hundreds of pairs of unblinking eyes staring at the vehicle.
And they only turned their heads slowly to follow it as it passed.
The collective silence and stillness of hundreds of animals created this deeply unnatural, uncanny sight. The terrified witnesses joked that the deer were actually the residents transforming at night.
But perhaps the most enduring, unresolved tale of this kind of micro-terror involves a spectral road encounter near a historic mining area in the Southwest.
A man and his partner were driving down a remote dirt road at night when they saw a lone, bright headlight. It belonged to a tall man dressed top to bottom in old-fashioned, tattered mining gear, including a helmet-mounted lamp.
He was holding a crowbar and was completely unmoving, facing the approaching car.
And as the car's headlights illuminated him fully, they noticed his skin had patches of black and appeared to be steaming in the cool night air. The witnesses could only stare, just paralyzed by the sight.
As they sped past, he slowly turned his headlamp to watch them, and then, unnervingly, began moving towards the car with long, deliberate strides, raising the crowbar above his head.
They accelerated, watching the lone, bright headlamp slowly fade, but never stop moving in the distance behind them.
The only context they could apply was the history of the area. A ghost miner, maybe, returning to wander the abandoned area, a physical manifestation of historical trauma and labor, and prepared to attack the first vehicle he saw. It's a powerful, dark image that defies any easy debunking.
Okay, so we have to shift gears completely now. We're leaving the steaming miners and phantom trains behind to enter the realm of rational, meticulously analyzed, and often painfully predictable failure.
And this demonstrates that often the most destructive events have the most preventable, human-made causes, rooted in institutional apathy and complacency.
We anchor this section with the devastating Amtrak Southwest Chief derailment near Kingman, Arizona in 1997. Amtrak Train 4 derailed because a crucial piece of infrastructure failed. Railroad Bridge 504.1S.
And this failure wasn't sudden. It was decades in the making.
The underlying issue, identified immediately by the NTSB, was a technical term critical to infrastructure: scour.
Explain what that is.
Scour is essentially the hidden enemy of bridges. It's the process where rapidly moving water, especially during floods, sucks the foundational material, sand, mud, stone out from underneath the bridge supports. It undermines the bents.
So the foundation of this failure was classic institutional negligence,
Right.
but it was amplified by geology and decades of bad construction.
Right. The original railroad construction in 1883 and then subsequent highway construction in 1934 both channeled and concentrated water flow in the area, starting and accelerating the erosion of the stream.
And this focused erosion created what engineers call a head cut, a vertical drop in the stream that migrated upstream over time, getting closer and closer to the bridge's supports.
Like a hidden ticking time bomb underneath the rail.
And the key takeaway from the NTSD sources is that the railroad personnel, ATSF and later BNSF, they knew the bridge was critically vulnerable to scour since at least 1959.
And they kept trying short-term fixes, like adding grout and stone to stabilize the mud cells.
But crucially, the engineering department formally recommended replacing Bridge 504.1 in 1975. They cited these recurring erosion problems and concerns about the inadequate waterway opening. This is a clear engineering-based warning sign.
The bridge needed to go.
So what did management do? This is where the institutional failure becomes, well, criminal.
They actively removed the necessary replacement from the 1977 Capital Improvement Program. Instead, maintenance personnel made a field decision in 1976 to build a cheap, unreinforced concrete crosswall downstream of the bridge.
The NTSB analysis concluded that this crosswall was poorly designed and completely inadequate. It failed due to long-term degradation combined with the local scour during the flood in August 1997.
And that failure, in turn, allowed the water to fully undermine the existing foundation protection, the grouted riprap, leading to the catastrophic failure of bridge bends 3, 4, and 5.
So the immediate cause of the derailment was the failure of the bridge. But the root cause was a documented managerial decision 20 years earlier to prioritize a cheap fix over a necessary expensive replacement.
A choice that cost human life.
But the final tragic failure was the inspection process on the morning of the accident. BNSF received a flash flood warning at 1:43 a.m., explicitly warning of heavy rainfall and potential localized flooding.
And a track supervisor was dispatched to perform a special high water inspection.
But the NTSB reported that this track supervisor, dispatched into a severe weather threat, was not a qualified bridge inspector.
He inspected the area between 4:30 and 4:45 a.m., noted water flowing heavily under the bridge, but reported absolutely no problems to dispatch.
And he stated he was completely 100% confident that the railroad could safely support traffic of any nature.
That phrase, completely 100% confident, is just chilling in hindsight. The bridge failed 71 minutes later at 5:56 a.m., derailing Amtrak Train 4.
The NTSB report was scathing. It concluded BNSF lacked proper foresight and planning. They were relying on personnel who lacked the essential training to recognize the potential damage floodwaters could inflict, especially under known scour conditions.
And the qualified bridge inspector for that area, the person who should have made that call, was on vacation and hours away. This lack of clear protocol and reliance on an unqualified inspector in a critical weather situation was a core finding of the NTSB.
Systemic institutional complacency that proved fatal.
There is a slight side story of hope, though, in the structural survival elements of the rolling stock. A detail that really underscores the violence of the derailment is that a massive 82-foot-long piece of rail dislodged and impaled the fourth locomotive unit.
That's right. It penetrated the locomotive, exited through the rear, and extended 19 feet into the first baggage car.
Remarkably, though the rail segment passed through the fuel tank, puncturing an internal baffle, no significant amount of diesel fuel was lost. The advanced high-ground clearance design of the P-42 locomotive fuel tanks prevented a massive fuel fire,
Which could have dramatically increased the casualty count. So engineering foresight saved lives even when institutional negligence failed.
Moving now from rail collapse to aerial chaos, let's analyze Emirates Flight 521 in Dubai 2016. A different type of catastrophic breakdown, one involving the subtle, dangerous interface between human cognition and advanced machine automation.
The investigation by the GCAA, the General Civil Aviation Authority in the UAE, revealed an incredibly fast and terrifying sequence of events. The technical speed of this disaster is terrifying.
It was warp speed. The entire sequence, from the captain calling for a go-around maneuver to the aircraft impacting the runway, took only 22 seconds.
One of the fastest commercial jet crashes outside of an immediate explosion. Everything hinged on those seconds.
The failure centered squarely on the automation trap during a critical late landing touchdown. The pilots commanded a go-around, and the captain immediately retracted the landing gear 4 seconds later. This is standard procedure.
But the automation system didn't respond as expected.
Not at all. The pilots had tried to use the takeoff go-around or TOT switches. These are designed to trigger maximum thrust and lift the aircraft immediately. However, the auto throttle failed to increase thrust. It held the engines at idle power.
A massive critical failure in the automated response.
The analysis showed the pilot operating in that high-stress, time-compressed go-around environment took a staggering 11 seconds to notice the thrust levers hadn't physically moved forward and the engines weren't responding.
And he only applied full manual power 7 seconds before the aircraft struck the runway.
So why the delay? The human brain, relying on automation, was focused on other critical tasks, retracting the gear, pitching up, assuming the engine automation was handling the thrust.
That's the heart of the automation trap, isn't it? The subtle degradation of human vigilance when systems usually work perfectly.
The GCA investigation found that reliance on the pilot to notice the thrust levers didn't move was a systemic design flaw. They recommended that the configuration alarm should trigger if thrust isn't at the correct setting during a go-around.
Our sources highlight the crucial lesson for manufacturers and airlines. Never assume that pilots will react correctly.
Exactly. Systems have to be designed assuming human error, fatigue, or cognitive tunneling will happen under stress. The automation must fail safely or provide aggressive, unambiguous warnings.
Yet despite this rapid, complex failure sequence, the true hero of the story was the Boeing 777 airframe itself.
Oh, absolutely. The plane survived being slammed against the runway and sliding on its belly for almost a kilometer at high speed.
It's a testament to crashworthiness engineering. The aircraft stayed in one structurally integral piece. It didn't immediately disintegrate. And crucially, the fuel tanks remained intact. That prevented a catastrophic immediate explosion and protected all 300 occupants from serious injury.
The evacuation story is equally dramatic. The crew performed brilliantly, and all 300 passengers and crew walked off the plane during a 7-minute evacuation period.
However, that success was marred by a persistent human error problem: passenger interference.
Tragically, the investigation found passengers immediately tried to retrieve carry-on luggage from the overhead compartments during the emergency evacuation, a phenomenon described as all too common.
People prioritize the emotional or monetary value of their stuff over the abstract, immediate danger of death by fire.
It's a fundamental human failure in the face of adrenaline and crisis, a moment of cognitive tunneling where they forget the primary directive is immediate survival, and it needlessly prolonged the evacuation time.
And the aftermath for the flight crew was harsh.
Very. Despite the GCAA finding no gross negligence, only human factors failure compounded by automation design, the sources confirmed the pilots were fired by Emirates.
Which highlights a cutthroat corporate environment that failed to value the unique hypervigilance. A pilot who survives something like that often develops. There were assets who were immediately discarded.
We have completed our deep dive now, traveling the entire spectrum of vanishing today, from the meticulously dissected mechanical failure to the profound, unsettling mystery of the Zanetti train.
So what does this entire investigation mean for us? For the people who rely daily on these massive vessels of transit?
Well, on the rational technical side, the world demands constant, hypervigilant caution against known predictable threats. Scour, institutional complacency, the automation trap, human factors failure. The enduring lesson is that systems must never assume correct human reaction or flawless infrastructure maintenance.
But the mystic world where we began offers a far more chilling proposition: that sometimes the vessel, its occupants, or both simply exit the known reality.
We see this in the Zanetti train, the phantom ghost planes, the long-drifting SS Bakimo, and that empty Eastern European Express. These aren't failures of maintenance, they are failures of physics, or perhaps failures of our ability to comprehend the universe.
The human connection across both extremes is the shared response, isn't it? Horror, confusion, and the painstaking need for an answer. For closure.
Whether the vessel is lost due to a faulty mudsill beneath an Arizona rail bridge or an unexplained temporal displacement that leaves hot coffee and empty seats, the trauma of loss without closure remains constant.
The great irony is that in the case of the Zanetti train, the vanishing allows the imagination to spin endless, thrilling possibilities. Time travel, dimensional slips, the ultimate mystery. The story is dark, but it is limitless in its potential.
Conversely, in the case of the Kingman derailment, the catastrophe is finite, solvable, and, most terrifyingly, repeatable. It was rooted in a decades-long managerial decision to save money. We know exactly who was negligent, and that negligence was a choice.
Which leads us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, as you weigh these two types of terror. We know the mechanical causes of a train wreck. We know the human-machine interface flaws that cause a jet to strike the runway. These are tragedies born of human error and corporate cost-cutting.
But the Zanetti train, Pan Am 914, and the empty Eastern European Express offer no such finite answer or responsible party. So is the terror of a rational catastrophe where we know exactly who was negligent and how the system failed, is that more comforting because we can demand accountability? Or is it ultimately more frightening because we realize the systems we trust are often betrayed by simple greed and apathy far more frequently than by the limitless, unknowable possibilities offered by the truly unexplained?